Well, Ian, thanks for taking the time to talk with me. I suppose first things first, where are you from and how did you get into tech?
I I'm currently living in Somerset, but as you can tell by the accents, I originate from the Midlands, from Birmingham to be exact. Uh, and I got into tech at a very early age, about 11 years old, when I got my first computer, Commodore VIC-20. I started to learn to program at the same time, and my first languages were BASIC and machine language, which at the time was used for games programming. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into tech and where I'm from.
I guess those are some throwback languages now that, aficionados of the genre will really appreciate some of
Yes,
those.
yeah, machine language at that time was a lot of the games back then, which you used to have to load on tape, by the way. A lot of the games were written in machine language. It was, yeah, it's very old and antiquated, but so am I.
So how many years have you been a software dev?
Well, including my childhood, if you want to put it from the point of view, how long have I actually been programming computers in one form
Yeah,
or another? Since the age of 11. So I'm giving away my age here, so I probably won't get another job after this.
you don't have to.
But it's 42 years.
Nice. So you've seen it all, really, haven't you? I suppose, really, within
Yes.
programming and yeah,
Yeah,
things have changed.
I've been programming since before PCs were used at home. It's yeah. Back then the Commodore machines or the Spectrums were the machines that people had at home, and they used to connect them to TVs and load stuff on cassettes. There was no internet in the homes then. So yeah,
Well, I remember the old dial-up and
yes,
making sure the printers turned off and stuff when someone calls the house phone.
yeah,
The good old days.
yeah.
um, what are some of the challenges visually impaired people face when using tech?
Well, I mean, everybody's disability, including visual impairment, is different, and
Mm,
it affects people, although they may have the same uh, type of problem. The using tech can be a very personal. The problems using tech can be very personal. So,
mm,
for example, I prefer a dark screen with light text,
mm, mm.
whereas other people with the same eye condition as me may prefer a white background with dark text. Uh, so the problems people face can be personal,
Mm.
and obviously people like Apple, organizations like Apple and Microsoft and other OS providers, and people who create the mobile phones, etc. They can give you accessibility options, but that it's like one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah, it's nuanced, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So the trick and the problem is that within the accessibility options provided to you, you need to figure out what works best for you.
Mm.
And I've spent a lifetime figuring this stuff out. Uh, but I know, but I mean, especially in recent years, I know what works for me. And fortunately, what works for me, I can use it across whether I'm working on Windows or Mac OS or on Linux. Fortunately, the options I need are available across all three, and even on mobile and tablet, I can use the options necessary for me. So, but I mean, there's even like options for people with other disabilities that work quite well with visually impaired people. For example, some of the options for flashing the screen but are available for deaf people, but let them know that there's you know, an alert has sounded, but obviously they can't hear it because they are deaf. The flashing of the screen works quite well for visually impaired people, because if they're like me and they're stuck fairly close to the screen, they might not see an alert in the top corner. They might not,
but they would get that flash.
But they'll get the flash. So it really is a case of trial and error with the accessibility options available to you at the time. But it also, I've got different pairs of glasses for different scenarios. So it can often be a case of the best accessibility option for a visually impaired person maybe getting slightly different glasses.
So not the tech at all, really.
Yeah, it really is trial and error, as I said at the beginning of this question.
So there's obviously a range of options. I mean, so following on from that, I mean, in your opinion, what more could be done, do you think, to improve accessibility, or is it a case of as tech sort of just improves, then obviously the accessibility options would follow? Or do you think there are some glaring omissions at the moment, or some low-hanging fruit that for you as a user, as it were, and a developer, obviously, do you see things that you're like, oh, I wish I'd do this, or why can't they do that?
Obviously, again, my wishes in accessibility may be completely different to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else, because, again, the accessibility options are very generalistic rather than specific. So it's not a one size fits all. Obviously, since I started my journey with tech, accessibility options and the range of options have grown from none to what they are today. And of course, there's always room for improvement, but you have to kind of iterate on this, and you have to get more people involved, and you get feedback, etc., etc. So, I mean, for example, Microsoft, for Windows 11, the accessibility options, they actually employ and get the feedback from far more disabled people now than they did previously. And a lot of the people who set out the options are actually disabled themselves. I was lucky enough to actually be contacted by Microsoft about Visual Studio Code, about the accessibility because of Visual Studio Code, because they read a post I put on LinkedIn about how Visual Studio Code is one of the best editors for me to use because of the way I can configure it to work with my eyesight. They were very much interested in this, so they contacted me, and I was having conversations with them via Google Meet and Zoom, etc., about accessibility. So kind of giving them feedback to specific questions, how they can improve it. So there's always room for improvement, and some companies obviously take it more seriously than others. Apple do a good job, and I use a Mac for my daily work, and I've got a Mac for pleasure, and I find certain accessibility options on there better than some of them on Windows. And then some of the accessibility options on Windows is perhaps better than some of them on Mac, but you kind of learn to get to use what is available to you at the time, and then hope that the next iteration of accessibility options, there's something that you've either wanted before, or you can tweak it in such a way whereby it does what you need next. So yeah, carry on.
No, I was going to say, it feels like at least now accessibility is more than just an afterthought, right? I mean, even at Gravitywell, when we're building an app, it's very much part of the design process. It's not something that you go, what about accessibility? And hopefully, by the sounds of things, it's something that is a consideration for all software companies, just as part of the process, like anything else, like any other part of UX or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I mean, now that accessibility is actually being built into a lot of websites, devices, etc., because so many more disabled people are using the internet and using devices for work, pleasure, and for improving their lives. It's a good thing, and it's a good thing to hear that Gravitywell take it seriously, because I know some companies, and I've worked for some, and I've had arguments with some, don't necessarily put accessibility first, whereas it should be. I mean, the government websites may not look very pretty, but they're accessible.
Yeah.
And, it's all good and well having a really fancy website, but if you're going to stop some people using it because you've not built it to be accessible, one, you're potentially losing business, and two, you're potentially breaking the law.
Yeah.
So, but the disabled people in recent years, they've actually started being taken seriously. I grew up in a time where disabled people were really off the edge of society. They were they were knew about, but they weren't part of society. But over the years, we've become more important. Still probably not as looked after or as important as we should be, but we're getting there. Sometimes these things do take time, unfortunately.
Ian, what's your personal sort of developer setup then?
As in equipment or
equipment wise, yeah.
Okay.
What are you working with?
Okay, I've got 2 Macs. I've got an Intel Mac and an M1 Mac. They are connected to a 48-inch OLED. I've also got a Windows machine, which is connected to the 48-inch OLED. On the other side of my office here, I've got another Windows machine connected to a 65-inch OLED. That is primarily a gaming rig. I did work in the gaming industry for a while as well, as a games tester, which was and my highlights of my life so far.
It's not a bad job, is it?
Playing games for a living,
Right.
as well as looking after their websites for a company. I used to love it. But anyway, getting back to the question, I've also got a Linux machine because I do some stuff on Linux, and I've also got a couple of NAS boxes, network attached storage, which I do a lot of Docker work on. I'm a big fan of Docker. So I've got a lot of toys. I've got a couple of iPads. I've got an iPhone and an Android phone. You may ask, why have I got all these different devices? It's because I do a lot of proof of concept stuff for
I was
apps.
going to say, is it for testing and things?
Yeah, for testing. So
yeah,
for the people I'm currently working for, I do a lot of proof of concept work, and obviously I want to make sure that actually a lot of the stuff works on the devices that we are building proof of concepts for. So I have, but I'm an enthusiast as well as working in the industry. I'm an enthusiast. So when something new and shiny comes out, I generally want to try and buy it if I can, for pleasure as well as this may come in useful in a certain project, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. So yeah, and the reason why such big monitors is I find with the accessibility options that I employ to actually be using computers, it works quite well with the size of the screens. I could potentially get rid of the screens and just use voice, but because I've got a bit of eyesight left, having such a big screen and using accessibility options works for me. It may be that at some point in the future I do go to just using text to speech, but I'm not there yet. And I've always been taught that you use the abilities that you've got at the time. So I've got a bit of eyesight, so I use a screen. So, and the 65-inch OLED for gaming, it's better than doing it on a smaller screen. So that's why I've got such a big screen. And also I use that screen anyway for watching TV up here in the office. So it suits many purposes.
Nice.
So yeah, that's my home setup.
Very nice. Important question, by the way. You team iPhone or Android? Or are you going to sit on the fence with that one?
No, iPhone.
Oh, a man after my own heart. Me too.
Because the accessibility on an iPhone, it's for visually impaired people, is superb. And you will actually find a lot of visually impaired people gravitate straight to iPhone rather than Android. So yes, part of a local group, the Glastonbury VIPs, the Glastonbury visually impaired people. They range from visually impaired people who've got a little bit of eyesight to visually impaired people who've got no eyesight. And they all have iPhones.
That's really interesting. And a great advert for Apple. I mean, actually, because with iPhone, one of the reasons it's so popular is because it is very user friendly, right? Like my dad, for example, is in his late 70s, and I think when he moved across he had a brick for the longest time, and moved to a smartphone. For me, it made sense for him to have, an iPhone because it just feels very user friendly. So it's good to know that sort of continues into the accessibility area as well.
Yeah.
Hey, Ian, back in 2017, you were denied a job interview by a potential employer because you use a guide dog, but a subsequent social media campaign on your behalf helped you land a job elsewhere. How did this affect you? And do you think society's attitudes towards disability within the workplace has improved in the 5 years since?
Okay, well, addressing the how did it make me feel sounds dramatic, but I've always been a relatively confident person, never give up, that sort of attitude.
Hmm.
But when I was told, sorry, we don't want a guide dog in the office, therefore we are withdrawing the interest, I actually couldn't stop crying. I actually
Hmm.
said to my wife, I actually want to die, which, yeah, got my wife upset because she'd never seen me so low.
Hmm.
But then, because I'd been campaigning on behalf of Royal National Institute for the Blind for so long as the lead campaigner for the southwest of England, I gave myself a kick and thought, you know what, I'm fighting back.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I got hold of all the contacts because part of my campaigning role, I'd got MPs' phone numbers. Uh, had meetings with members of like government ministers. So I just contacted them all, including the Equalities Commission, contacted all my contacts in BBC and ITV,
Hmm.
and basically they basically went after the company,
Hmm.
but it turned me down because it was against the law,
Yeah, of course.
and it it still gave me a real kicking because although I'd faced discrimination over the years, I'd never been discriminated to that degree. You know, I can't help my disability, the same as some people can't, the same as people can't help what color their skin they are, or what gender they are,
Hmm.
or if they're gay or straight. You know,
Hmm.
you are who you are, and you should be accepted for who you are. And to be told that you can't have a job here because of your disability, I was absolutely crucified.
Hmm.
But I received a lot of positive feedback online. There were some trolls online who gave me a real hard time uh, and who agreed with the company. But you know what? These keyboard warriors, if you come face to face with them, they soon crumble.
Yeah.
But anyway, fortunately, it turned into a job with a company who were creating a mobile game that fronted a application that helped visually impaired people navigate the world. So they
Hmm.
said, come join us. And yeah, I started working for them. And since then, I've been fully employed. Uh, and yeah, my life has changed dramatically. In terms of has has the lives of disabled people improved in recent years? I would say it has because we are accepted more. I know it sounds a strange thing to say. We are accepted more because we should have been anyway.
Hmm.
But we with the help of tech and with the help, in a way, of COVID, we
Hmm.
are accepted more now because up until a couple of years ago, a lot of employers were like, oh, no, 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 you can't work from home. It's never going to happen. It's never going to be a thing.
Yeah.
The office is where people work.
And look at us both now,
And look at us now. We're
Yeah.
working remotely. Working remotely actually helps disabled people because the most accessible office is the office that you create for
I
yourself,
say it's their own. Yeah.
is their own. So this is my office. I spent a small fortune on building it,
Hmm.
but it's more accessible than an office that you guys could create for me or
Hmm.
my current employer because everything I've got in here, I've handpicked. The lighting is perfect for me. I've worked in offices that are like greenhouses, and it's just full of glass, And because I suffer with light glare, I used to end up with headaches. Whereas I've got blackout blinds in here if I need it. I've got lighting that I can adjust to whatever I want. So disabled people have got more options to work now because they can work from home, as well as disabled people, they've got more of a voice nowadays because as the years has moved on, the law has changed to be a bit more inclusive. You know, it's not fully there, and you know, you still will get some discrimination, but it's not as bad as it was back in the 90s.
Good. I mean, it's to me, it's it's just a ridiculous irony that that company felt uncomfortable or whatever about you having a guide dog. Yet you could go to most tech companies now; it's full of dogs.
Yeah,
People bring their dog into the office all the time now, don't they? It's well, I mean, at least since then, there's like you said, it's been a very positive trajectory on as far as your career goes, and it's great that shone a light on the issue. And obviously we'll include the link to that BBC article, I think, in this piece so that people can check it out. You mentioned the Royal National Institute for Blind. You use your voice and tech skills to campaign on behalf of the visually impaired. Aside from them, are you involved with any other organisations? And to what extent?
Well, I'm in the Somerset site, which I used to spend some time with. There's the local group, the visually impaired people group in Glastonbury, but I still spend an awful lot of time with my ex-boss, who still runs a company that have a lot of dealings with organisations around the world. So I spend some time with him in meetings, speaking to organisations in South America, like Colombia, speaking to organisations in North America. We were speaking to some guy the other week from Portland, Oregon. So because different organisations around the world work differently, and it's nice sometimes to link up with other organisations so that you can share information and share best practices, that sort of stuff. So I'm not affiliated to one organisation per se. I've been looked after by the RNIB ever since I had dealings with them when I was in my teens up until now. But I deal with a lot of organisations from all over the place.
Yeah, awesome. Well, finally, Ian, what is the best kept secret in Glastonbury? Or maybe you want to keep it a secret. I don't know.
Well, I couldn't tell you all the secrets because I love being here too much. But I was trying to think on this, and perhaps one of the best places that somebody could go to in Glastonbury, if they like this sort of thing, is Burns the Bakers, because they do some fantastic bread, and they do some fantastic pasties and cakes. I mean, the Eccles cakes from there are absolutely to die for. And I have something from there called a Glastonbury pasty. It's pretty much a Cornish pasty, but named with Glastonbury. But it is absolutely lovely, and they do these fantastic lamb and mint sausage rolls.
Very nice.
There is obviously vegan selections because my wife's vegan. I'm allergic to dairy, but it's a lot of people that I know who travel to Glastonbury gravitate straight towards Burns the Bakers when they get there. And my brother-in-law, he takes back a tray of cakes when he goes home, simply because Burns the Bakers is absolutely lovely. So, although perhaps not a secret because he's quite successful, it is one of these little places in Glastonbury that you really don't want to miss if you can.
It's a must visit
Yes.
when you okay.
Yeah.
Grab a Glastonbury
Pasty.
pasty and take a walk up the tour. That sound like
Oh God,
something.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
you'll probably need the energy to walk up the tour.
nice.
When I first moved down here, I used to walk up and down the tour every single day.
Did you?
Uh, every single day, me and my guide dog.
Nice.
Uh, but a bit like a lot of places, you get to a point where the tour is just part of where you live.
Just
It
that
becomes
thing around the corner. It doesn't become that
just yeah.
special. Yeah.
Whereas some people, people visitors will go, "Oh wow, you got this on your doorstep. This is so
Yeah.
exciting." But in the end, it just becomes the norm.
Yeah.
I mean, the first year I moved down here, we had a lot of snow, and I saw the tour and the hill it's on get turned into an impromptu uh, tobogganist sort of track, and people skiing down it and sledging, and it's absolutely incredible. I'd never seen anything quite like it. But yeah, the tour now is just like, oh yeah, it's the tour.
Nice. Ian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending some time with me.